Have you ever felt like someone is watching you? Not just looking at you in passing, but really, truly studying you, watching every single move you make, learning your habits, waiting for you to make a mistake, like you are the prey. Before we dive into today's story, I want you to do me a quick favor. Head down to the comments section right now. Tell me, what time is it where you are right now? And where exactly are you listening to this from? Are you laying in your bed in the dark? Are you driving alone on a quiet road? Maybe you are walking home with your headphones in. Let me know. And while you are down there, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on those notifications. Trust me, you are going to want to stick around for this whole thing. But I have to warn you before we begin. This isn't your typical spooky campfire ghost story. There are no ghosts or monsters under the bed here. This is real. This is about what happens when the hunter becomes the hunted, when the woods you love turn into a trap. Let's get into it. Chapter 1: The Deep Woods. My name is Jake. I've been a hunter for as long as I can remember. I grew up in a family where hunting was just a way of life. My grandpa taught me everything I know. He gave me my first rifle when I was just 12 years old. He taught me how to track animals, how to read the mud for fresh footprints, how to mask my scent so the wind wouldn't give me away. Most importantly, he taught me how to respect the woods. He always used to tell me something I never forgot. He said, "Jake, the forest is alive. It breathes. And if you don't pay attention, it will swallow you whole." I never really understood what he meant by that, not until this trip. I always felt at home out there, especially in the deep, dark forests of Pennsylvania. There's a certain kind of magic in the Pennsylvania woods during late autumn. The leaves turn bright orange and dark red. The air gets this sharp, cold bite to it that wakes up your lungs. There is something so peaceful about being out there completely alone. Just you, the giant trees, and the crisp autumn air. No cell phone service, no emails pinging in your pocket, no boss yelling at you about deadlines, no traffic noise, just absolute perfect quiet. It was my escape from the real world. Whenever life got too stressful, I would pack up my truck and head into the trees. But looking back on it now, that quiet was not peaceful. That quiet was a warning, and I was just too blind to see it. It was a Friday afternoon when I finally parked my old truck. I was at the edge of a hunting trail I had used maybe a dozen times before over the years. It was a secluded spot. You had to drive down a really rough dirt road for about an hour just to get to the trailhead. My truck was covered in dust by the time I cut the engine. I stepped out and stretched my legs. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. I felt the stress of the city leaving my body instantly. I walked around to the back of the truck and lowered the tailgate. I grabbed my hunting rifle. It is a heavy, reliable bolt-action rifle that I keep in perfect condition. I checked the chamber, made sure it was clear, and slung it over my shoulder. Then I grabbed my heavy camping pack. It had everything I needed for a long weekend off the grid. A small green tent, a thick sleeping bag rated for freezing temperatures, water filters, dried food, a good hunting knife, and my emergency medical kit. It was heavy, but I was used to the weight. I locked the truck, put my keys deep in my pocket, and started the long hike in. My plan for this trip was different from the usual. Usually, I would hike in about a mile or two and set up camp near the main trail. But this time, I wanted to go deep. I wanted to get far away from the main paths, far away from any other weekend hunters who might ruin my peace and quiet. I wanted to find a spot where nobody else had stepped foot in years. I hiked for about 3 long hours. The terrain was rough and unforgiving. I had to push through thick bushes and climb over giant fallen logs. My boots crunched loudly on the dry, dead leaves covering the forest floor. I could feel the sweat dripping down my back despite the cold air. My legs were burning from the incline, but I kept pushing forward. I loved the burn. It made me feel alive. The sun was starting to get pretty low in the sky. The golden hour was fading fast. The shadows from the tall pine trees were getting long and dark. They stretched across the ground like long black fingers, trying to grab my boots. I knew I needed to find a spot to camp soon before I lost the light completely. Setting up a tent in the pitch black is a complete nightmare. You end up losing your stakes and tripping over your own guy lines. Finally, just as the sun touched the top of the mountains, I saw exactly what I was looking for. I pushed through a thick wall of pine branches and stepped into a small, perfect clearing. It was relatively flat, which is rare out here. And best of all, I could hear the gentle, rushing sound of moving water nearby. A small, fresh stream was cutting right through the edge of the clearing. It was an absolute hunter's paradise. I dropped my heavy bag to the dirt with a loud thud. I rolled my shoulders backward, feeling the amazing relief of the weight being gone. I took a long sip of water from my canteen and got straight to work. Everything felt completely normal. The woods were acting exactly like they always do. I unpacked my green tent and snapped the fiberglass poles together. I slit them through the fabric and staked the tent down tight into the soft earth. Then I went walking around the edge of the clearing to gather some dry firewood. I picked up dead, fallen branches and handfuls of dried pine needles to use as kindling. The woods around me were alive with normal, comforting sounds. Birds were chirping high up in the branches above my head. I could hear a few gray squirrels running up and down the rough tree bark, chasing each other. The cold autumn wind was gently rustling the dead orange leaves on the ground. It was the perfect soundtrack to a Friday evening. I built a small fire ring out of some smooth rocks I found near the stream. I arranged my wood, struck a single match, and got a nice little fire going. The bright orange flames danced around, bringing a wave of warmth to the freezing air. I pulled out a small metal camping pot and heated up some canned beef stew for dinner. I sat down on a thick fallen log near the fire. I ate my hot food right out of the pot and watched the sun finally disappear behind the mountains. The sky turned from dark blue to a deep, inky black. The stars came out one by one. They were shining so much brighter than you ever see them back in the city. I was completely relaxed. I was happy. I was exactly where I wanted to be. But right as the last tiny bit of purple light faded completely from the horizon, everything just stopped. I mean it. Absolutely everything. The birds that were just singing a minute ago went dead silent. The squirrels completely stopped moving in the trees. The wind died down to absolutely nothing. Not a single leaf was rustling on the ground. It was like someone had suddenly hit the mute button on the entire forest. I froze with my metal spoon halfway to my mouth. I held my breath and just listened to the dark. Usually, when the woods go dead silent like that out of nowhere, it means a predator is nearby. The smaller animals know when danger is close. They shut up and hide so they don't become someone else's dinner. A bear, maybe? Or a hungry mountain lion prowling around. I slowly lowered my spoon and set my warm pot down on the log beside me. I reached over very carefully and pulled my rifle a little closer to my right leg. I wasn't terrified yet, just being a smart hunter. I've dealt with black bears before. They usually run away if you make enough noise or stand your ground. I slowly stood up, trying not to make any sudden, loud movements. I reached deep into my jacket pocket and grabbed my heavy-duty tactical flashlight. I clicked the button with my thumb. The bright white beam cut through the pitch-black darkness like a laser. I slowly shined the light in a wide circle around my little camp. I pointed it deep into the dark gaps between the trees. I was looking for the reflection of animal eyes. Usually, a bear or a deer's eyes will glow bright green or yellow when a flashlight hits them. I scanned the tree line, left to right, up and down. Nothing. Just endless rows of thick brown tree trunks. Just long shadows, shifting and jumping in the flickering light of my campfire. Just a bear, I whispered to myself out loud, trying to sound confident. It probably smelled the hot stew and decided to wander off when it heard me. I clicked the flashlight off and sat back down on the log, but the heavy feeling in the pit of my stomach was telling me otherwise. My hunter instincts were screaming at me. It didn't feel like a normal black bear was out there in the dark. I know what a bear feels like. This felt completely, totally different. It felt heavier. It felt smart. It felt like pure, focused bad intentions. Like something was standing just outside the ring of light, watching me, studying my face, counting my steps. I tried my hardest to shake the paranoid feeling off. You get easily spooked when you're alone in the dark woods. Your brain plays nasty tricks on you. It makes you see monsters in the shadows that aren't really there. I forced myself to finish my dinner quickly. The stew tasted like ash in my mouth, but I ate it anyway. I didn't want to sit out in the open anymore. I felt too exposed sitting next to the bright fire. I stood up and kicked a bunch of loose, damp dirt onto the flames to put them out. I watched the red-hot coals hiss and smoke until the fire was totally dead. The only light left was the pale, silver glow of the moon shining through the pine branches above. It was time to get some sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a long, hard day of tracking deer. I grabbed my rifle, my pack, and my flashlight and crawled into my small green tent. I zipped the door shut all the way down to the bottom corner. I took off my heavy, muddy boots and my thick jacket. I slid down into my warm, insulated sleeping bag. I kept my fully loaded rifle right next to me inside the sleeping bag, just in case that invisible bear decided to come back looking for my leftovers. I laid my head back on my rolled-up jacket and closed my eyes tightly. The unnatural silence was still out there. It was so quiet I could actually hear my own heart beating loudly in my ears. Thump, thump, thump. I tried to focus on my breathing to calm myself down. In and out, nice and slow. I eventually drifted off into a light, very uneasy sleep. I don't know exactly how long I was asleep for, maybe an hour, maybe 2, but suddenly my eyes snapped wide open in the pitch black of the tent. I was completely 100% awake in a split second. Something had woken me up. I held my breath. I didn't move a single muscle. I strained my ears, listening closely to the dark woods outside the thin nylon walls. At first, there was nothing, just the exact same heavy, suffocating silence. But then I heard it again. It was so close it made the blood in my veins run ice cold. Snap! A thick, heavy, dry branch breaking under the weight of something outside. It wasn't the soft, padded sound of an animal paw. Animals know how to walk quietly in the woods. They know how to avoid stepping on dry branches like that. This was a boot. It was a distinct, heavy, flat human footstep. Crush! Another step. The dry autumn leaves crunched loudly under the massive weight. Whatever it was out there, it was walking slowly, carefully, deliberately. And the absolute worst part? The footsteps stopped right outside the thin wall of my tent. I could hear slow, heavy breathing on the other side of the fabric, just inches away from my face. What would you do if you were trapped in a tent with someone standing right outside? I held my breath completely. I didn't dare make a single sound. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. The breathing outside my tent was raspy. It was heavy and wet, like whoever was standing there had a bad set of lungs. I slowly slid my right hand down to the trigger of my rifle. I tightened my grip on the cold metal. I moved my thumb and clicked the safety off. Click. It was a tiny, metallic sound, but out there in the dead silent forest, it sounded like a firecracker. The breathing outside stopped instantly. Whoever was out there heard the gun. They knew I was awake. They knew I was armed. We were having a standoff through a thin piece of nylon fabric. I waited for a hunting knife to slash through the side of the tent. I waited for dirty hands to grab my legs through the dark. I aimed the barrel right at the door. Minutes passed in total silence. It felt like hours. My arms were shaking from holding the heavy gun up for so long. Then, slowly, the heavy footsteps started again. Crunch, snap. But they weren't coming closer. They were moving away, fading back into the deep, dark woods. I didn't sleep a single wink for the rest of that night. I just sat up, clutching my rifle, staring at the zipper of the tent until the sun finally came up. When the morning light hit the tent, the woods sounded normal again. The birds were back. The wind was blowing. Everything felt perfectly fine. But I knew it wasn't. I unzipped the tent with a shaking hand. I poked my head out into the freezing morning air. I looked down at the ground right next to my tent, right exactly where I heard the heavy breathing. My stomach dropped down to my knees. There were footprints. Huge, deep boot prints pressed hard into the damp mud. These weren't normal, lightweight hiking boots. They were massive, heavy-duty work boots with deep tread marks. And they circled my tent. Not just once, 3 times. Someone had walked in slow circles around me while I was sleeping in the dark. I felt physically sick. I needed to pack up my gear and get out of there, fast. But as I turned around to grab my bag, something caught my eye. Deep in the tree line, about 50 yards away from my camp, something large was hanging from a thick oak branch. I raised my rifle and looked through the scope to get a magnified view. My blood ran ice cold. It was a deer, but it wasn't field dressed like a normal hunter would do to preserve the meat. It was strung up by its neck with a thick, dirty yellow rope. It was hanged like a medieval execution. Its eyes were wide open and completely glassy. I slowly lowered my gun. Hunters do not do that. Poachers do not do that. Only a complete psychopath does that to an animal. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly walked over to the tree. My instincts were telling me to run away, but I had to know what I was dealing with. As I got closer, the terrible smell hit me. It smelled like rotten pennies and spoiled meat. The deer had been hanging there for at least a couple of days, but the dead animal wasn't the worst part. When I looked at the thick trunk of the oak tree, I saw it. Deep, jagged lines were carved right into the bark. They were symbols. They looked like twisted stick figures or some kind of sick, primitive warning sign. I reached out and touched the tree sap leaking from the cuts. It was sticky. It was wet. These symbols were carved fresh. They were carved last night, while I was sitting completely clueless by my little campfire. Suddenly, the deep Pennsylvania woods didn't feel vast and open anymore. They felt like a tiny cage. I spun around, looking desperately into the endless rows of pine trees. I knew he was out there somewhere, watching me look at his sick artwork, laughing at me. I sprinted back to my campsite as fast as I could. I didn't even bother taking my tent down properly. I just ripped the metal stakes out of the ground. I shoved the whole messy ball of fabric into my bag. I didn't care about the dirt or breaking the balls. I just wanted to get back to the safety of my truck. I threw the heavy camping bag over my shoulders. I racked a live round into the chamber of my rifle. I looked down at the tactical compass strapped to my left wrist. North. The dirt road where I parked my truck was 3 hours north. I started walking fast. It was almost a light jog. I kept my rifle raised at the low ready. I kept checking over my shoulder every 10 seconds, but the woods were so incredibly thick. Every shadow looked like a tall man standing behind a tree trunk. Every snapping twig sounded like a heavy boot crunching a leaf. About an hour into my hike back, I found the second warning sign. It was sitting right in the middle of the narrow dirt path, a small pile of rocks stacked perfectly on top of each other, a trail cairn. But sitting right on the very top rock was a bright red shotgun shell. It was used, it was empty, it was placed there strictly on purpose, a terrified little breadcrumb. He was letting me know that he was moving faster than me. He was letting me know he was ahead of me on the trail. He was standing right between me and my truck. I stopped dead in my tracks. The panic started to bubble up hot in my throat. I am a big guy. I am heavily armed. But out here in the deep brush, none of that mattered at all. This psycho knew these woods 1,000 times better than I did. He was playing a sick game of cat and mouse with me, and I was the mouse. I immediately stepped off the main dirt trail. I decided I had to bushwhack. I was going to cut straight through the thick brush and make my own path. It would be much slower, it would be a lot louder, but it was way better than walking directly into a planned ambush on the trail. I pushed hard through the sharp thorn bushes and thick pine branches. They ripped my expensive hunting jacket. They scratched deep red lines across my face. I didn't care about the pain. I just kept moving north. The sun was directly above me in the sky now. It was high noon, but down here on the forest floor, under the thick canopy of leaves, it still felt dark and gloomy. I finally stopped behind a massive boulder to catch my breath. I pulled out my canteen to take a quick drink of water. My hand was shaking so badly I spilled water down my chin, and that is exactly when I heard the whistling. It was a low, slow, completely tuneless whistle. It echoed eerily through the tall trees. It was absolutely impossible to tell which direction it was coming from. It sounded like the noise was coming from everywhere all at once. I dropped my canteen in the dirt. I raised my rifle fast, spinning in a slow, tight circle. "Who is out there?" I yelled at the top of my lungs. My voice cracked badly. I sounded utterly terrified. I hated that he could hear how scared I was. The whistling stopped immediately. Then a voice called back through the trees. It was deep. It was raspy and gravelly. The exact same voice that belonged to the heavy breathing outside my tent. "Hunting season is over, city boy." The voice came from my deep left. I aimed my rifle barrel directly at the dense wall of green brush. "Show yourself," I screamed, my finger resting heavy on the trigger. Silence. Just the cold wind picking back up and rustling the dead leaves. He wasn't going to shoot me. Not yet. He was taunting me, pushing me to the edge of my sanity. He wanted me to panic and run blind like a scared rabbit. And the most terrifying truth of all was, his plan was actually working. I did not stick around to chat with him. I did not try to act tough anymore. I turned around and I ran. I completely abandoned the idea of being quiet. I did not care about making noise. I crashed straight through the thick bushes like a wild, terrified animal. Sharp, dead branches whipped across my face. They cut deep scratches into my cheeks and my forehead. I could feel warm blood slowly dripping down the side of my face, but I did not stop to wipe it off. My heavy hunting boots slipped on wet rocks. I stepped on slimy green moss and almost twisted my ankle, but I forced myself to keep my balance. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins like rocket fuel. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. Every single survival instinct in my body was screaming at me to run faster, to get away from that raspy voice. But running totally blind in the deep woods is a terrible idea. It is the worst mistake a hunter can make. That is exactly how you break an ankle or snap a leg bone. And out here, miles away from any road, a broken leg is an absolute death sentence. Nobody was coming to save me. Nobody even knew exactly where I was. I had to force my brain to calm down. I had to stop the blind panic. I forced myself to slow down from a dead sprint to a very fast, steady walk. I needed to catch my breath before my lungs gave out completely. I needed to think clearly and make a real plan. I stopped behind a massive oak tree to hide for a second. I pulled up my left sleeve with a shaking hand. I checked the tactical compass strapped to my wrist. The little needle bounced around before settling on north. I was still heading in the right direction, but the dirt road and my old truck were still miles away. I had hours of walking left, and the woods were only getting thicker the further I went. The tall pine trees grew so close together here that their branches locked tight at the top. They completely blocked out the blue sky and the sun. It felt like dark twilight down on the forest floor, even though it was only mid-afternoon. I kept my heavy rifle raised tight against my chest. My finger was resting right next to the trigger. I was constantly scanning every single tree trunk. I was checking every dark shadow. I fully expected him to jump out from behind a rock at any second with a knife. I expected him to charge at me, but he didn't. He was not rushing this. He was playing a very sick, twisted long game with me. He knew the terrain better than I did. He was letting the rough, unforgiving forest do all the hard work for him. He wanted me to tire myself out. He wanted me to drain my energy until I could not fight back anymore. About 30 long minutes later, I smelled it again, that exact same horrible, sickening smell from the hanging deer, the smell of rotting meat and rusty, dirty metal. It hit my nose so hard I almost threw up my breakfast. I stopped fast and covered my nose and mouth with my jacket sleeve. I crouched down low to the ground and looked ahead. Right in front of me was a small, deep, muddy ravine. It was like a large ditch cut right through the middle of the forest. I had to cross it to keep moving north toward my truck. There was no way around it. The sides were steep and covered in slick, wet mud. I slowly slid down the steep bank very carefully. I kept my weight leaning back so I would not fall flat on my face. When I reached the bottom, my boots sank deep into the thick, gross mud. It made a loud sucking sound every time I took a step. And that is exactly when I saw the trap. It was set up right in the middle of the only path leading up the other side of the ravine. It was not a normal steel bear trap you buy at a store. It was homemade. It was a thick, braided wire cable. It was stretched totally tight between two large tree trunks. It was hidden perfectly under a loose pile of dead, brown autumn leaves, a tripwire. If I had been running blindly in a panic like I was earlier, I would have hit that wire at full speed. I stopped breathing for a second. I slowly followed the thin wire with my eyes to see what it was connected to. I looked high up into the thick branches directly over the muddy path. My stomach dropped straight to the ground. Hanging up there was a massive bundle of heavy, sharp wooden logs. They were tied tightly together with that same dirty yellow rope I saw on the deer. The ends of the logs were carved into sharp, deadly wooden spikes. It was a deadfall trap, like something straight out of an old jungle war movie. If I hit that tripwire, those spiked logs would swing down and crush me instantly. They would pin me to the muddy ground. I stared at it in pure horror. This man did not just want to shoot me from a distance. He wanted to hunt me like wild game. He wanted to trap me. He wanted to watch me suffer and bleed out slowly in the dirt. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my rifle. I very carefully stepped over the tripwire. I made sure my boots cleared the wire by at least a foot. I did not want to risk my shoelace catching it. I scrambled up the other side of the slippery, muddy bank. I used my free hand to grab onto exposed tree roots to pull myself up. When I finally reached the top, I collapsed onto my knees. My boots were completely soaked and heavy with thick, cold mud. My jeans were wet up to my knees. I was absolutely, completely exhausted. I had not slept a single minute the night before. My leg muscles were burning and screaming for a break. Every breath I took felt like breathing in cold glass. I wanted to just lay down in the leaves and close my eyes for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes of rest. But I looked up at the sky above the tree line. The little bit of sky I could see was starting to turn orange and dark purple. The sun was going down again. Night was coming fast, and the thought of being stuck in the pitch-black dark with this psychopath, it made my stomach twist into painful, freezing cold knots. I forced myself to stand back up. My knees popped loudly. "Come on, Jake, just keep moving," I muttered out loud to myself. "Don't stop. Do not let him win." I pushed my tired legs to move faster. I tried to ignore the sharp pain in my lower back. I tried to ignore the blisters forming on my heels. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, heading north, always heading north. But then, as the last bit of sunlight began to fade completely, the woods went completely dead silent again. It happened in an instant. The cold wind stopped blowing through the branches. The insects completely stopped buzzing and chirping. The birds went quiet. It was the exact same unnatural, terrifying, dead silence from the night before. The whole forest was holding its breath. He was close. He was very, very close. I could physically feel his eyes burning into the back of my neck. I felt that heavy, dark energy pressing down on me. I stopped walking and stood frozen like a statue. I listened with everything I had. Crack! A thick, dry branch snapped loud right behind me. It was not far away this time, not 50 yards away, maybe 20 yards, maybe even closer. I spun around fast, bringing my heavy rifle up to my shoulder in a smooth motion. I pressed my cheek against the cold wooden stalk. I stared hard into the thick, dark green brush. I tried to find a shape, a shadow, anything. "I have a loaded gun!" I screamed into the silent trees. My voice was shaking with fear and exhaustion. "I will blow your head off! I swear to God I will shoot you!" I waited for a response. I waited for the raspy voice to laugh at me again. But there was no voice. Suddenly, a heavy rock flew straight out of the dark bushes. It was not a small pebble. It was the size of a baseball. It flew fast and hit me hard right on my left collarbone. I yelled out in pain and stumbled backward. The hit was so hard I accidentally dropped my heavy tactical flashlight in the dirt. The light flickered and rolled away from me. Before I could even recover my balance from the rock, a loud, booming explosion echoed right through the trees. It was deafening. A massive shotgun blast. Tree bark exploded from the giant pine trunk right next to my head. Sharp, hot wood splinters flew everywhere. They cut deep into the side of my face and my neck. The sound of the gunshot was so loud it made my ears ring instantly. A high-pitched, painful whine blocked out all other sounds. I could not hear anything but that awful ringing. He was not playing his sick little games anymore. The scary warning shots were officially over. The mental torture phase was done. He was moving in for the actual kill. He wanted me dead right here, right now. Panic took over my body completely. I did not even aim properly. I just pointed my hunting rifle directly at the shaking bushes where the shot came from. I pulled the trigger fast. Bang! The powerful kick of the heavy rifle slammed into my bruised shoulder. It hurt, but I did not care. I quickly racked the bolt back with my right hand. The empty brass shell flew out into the dirt. I fired another blind shot deep into the dark trees. Bang! I did not wait to see if I actually hit him. I knew I probably didn't. I turned around and ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my entire life. I ran like a man who knew he was about to die. I left my expensive flashlight lying right there in the dirt. I did not care about the light. I just needed to get distance between us. The sun finally dipped completely below the mountain horizon. The thick Pennsylvania woods plunged into deep, terrifying darkness. I was running completely blind in the pitch-black cold. I could not see my own hands in front of my face. Branches were tearing at my clothes, roots were trying to trip my feet, and through the ringing in my ears, I heard it. The heavy, steady sound of those massive work boots crashing through the brush right behind me. He was not hiding anymore. He was actively chasing me down. He was running, and he was getting much, much closer. I was running completely blind. The darkness was like a thick, heavy blanket wrapped tightly around my head. I could not see my own hands waving wildly in front of my face. I just kept them pushed out, trying to stop the invisible tree trunks from smashing my teeth in. The sound of his boots was right on my heels. Thud, thud, thud. He sounded like a massive freight train crashing through the delicate woods. He did not care about the sharp branches hitting him. He did not care about tripping over the roots. He was just a machine fueled by pure, terrifying rage, and he was gaining on me. My lungs were burning so badly I tasted copper in the back of my throat. My legs felt like they were made of solid lead. I knew I could not outrun him. Not out here. Not in his territory. If I kept running blind, I was going to hit a tree or fall into another ravine. And that would be the end of it. I needed to hide. I needed to disappear into the forest completely. I threw my weight to the right and made a sharp, sudden turn off my imaginary path. I dove straight into a massive patch of thick, thorny bushes. The thorns ripped through my jeans and tore deep into my skin. I bit down hard on my own lip to stop myself from screaming out in pain. I crawled on my hands and knees through the freezing mud. I felt around desperately in the pitch black. My hands brushed against something hard and rough. It was a massive, uprooted pine tree. It must have fallen over during a heavy storm years ago. The giant root system was ripped out of the ground, creating a small, dark hollow underneath it. It was a tiny cave of dirt and dead wood. It was my only chance. I squeezed my broad shoulders into the tight, muddy hole. I pushed myself backward, as deep into the dirt as I could possibly go. I pulled my rifle tight against my chest. I curled my legs up to make myself as small as possible. The smell of wet earth and rotting worms filled my nose. I closed my eyes tight and tried to control my violent breathing. In and out, through the nose, slowly, quietly. Less than 10 seconds later, he burst through the brush. The heavy crashing stopped exactly where I had turned off the path. He knew I had stopped running. He knew I was hiding. Then, a bright white beam of light sliced through the darkness. It swept over the trees and the bushes. It was my tactical flashlight, the one I dropped when he hit me with the rock. He had picked it up. He was using my own gear to hunt me down. The bright white light slowly cut through the trees, searching for any sign of me. I held my breath completely. I clamped my left hand hard over my mouth and nose. I prayed to God that my racing heartbeat wasn't loud enough for him to hear. The heavy footsteps started again. Crunch. Snap. He was walking slowly now. He was sweeping the area. He was looking for broken branches. He was looking for my fresh footprints in the soft mud. The footsteps got closer and closer until they stopped right on top of the fallen tree I was hiding under. The heavy trunk groaned and shifted under his massive weight. A shower of loose dirt and tiny rocks fell down directly onto my face. I kept my eyes squeezed shut. I did not move a single muscle. I was completely paralyzed with fear. He was standing right above me. Only a few inches of dead wood and dirt separated us. If he pointed that bright flashlight down into the root system, he would see my boots. He would see me trapped like a rat in a cage. I waited for the blinding light to hit my face. I waited for the barrel of his shotgun to poke through the roots. My fingers slowly tightened on the trigger of my rifle. If he saw me, I was going to shoot up through the wood. It was my only play. But the light never came down. Instead, he spoke. His voice was so close it vibrated through the dead tree trunk. "I know you're right here, city boy." His raspy, wet voice was terrifyingly calm. "You can't hide forever. The woods belong to me." He laughed. It was a low, wet, sick sound. "You bleed like a stuck pig. I can smell it on you." He was right. The scratches on my face from the wood splinters were still bleeding slowly. The warm blood was dripping down my neck, soaking into my collar. I squeezed my eyes tighter. Tears of absolute terror mixed with the blood and mud on my face. I did not make a sound. I became part of the dirt. I became part of the tree. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, just listening to the quiet forest, waiting for me to crack, waiting for me to make a single mistake. Finally, the tree groaned again as he stepped off it. The heavy footsteps started slowly moving away. Crunch, crunch. The bright beam of the flashlight faded into the distance. I did not move. Even when I could not hear him anymore, I stayed exactly where I was. I knew he might be trying to trick me. He might be standing just out of sight, waiting in the dark with his light turned off. I stayed shoved under that freezing, muddy tree root for the rest of the night. I do not know how I didn't freeze to death. My entire body was shaking violently from the cold and the shock. Every time the wind blew a branch, I thought he was coming back. I stayed awake for every single agonizing second of that endless night. Slowly, incredibly slowly, the pitch-black darkness began to lift. The sky above the trees turned a very dark, dull gray. Dawn was finally breaking. The birds slowly started to chirp again. The normal sounds of the forest returned. The spell was broken. He was gone. I waited another full hour just to be absolutely sure. When the sun was fully up and shining brightly through the leaves, I finally moved. My joints were completely stiff. My muscles screamed in agony as I uncurled my legs. I crawled out of the dirt hole on my hands and knees. I was completely covered in thick brown mud and dried blood. I looked like a dead man walking, but I was alive. I stood up slowly and grabbed my heavy rifle. I checked my compass. North. I started walking. I did not care about the pain in my back. I did not care about the cuts on my face or the thorns in my legs. I just walked. I moved like a zombie through the bright morning forest. About 2 hours later, I heard it. The most beautiful sound in the entire world. The distant, low hum of a car engine. A highway. I pushed through the final layer of thick brush, and there it was. The rough dirt road where I had parked my truck. My dusty, beautiful old truck was sitting right where I left it. It looked completely untouched. I stumbled out of the tree line and onto the gravel. I practically fell against the side of my truck. I reached deep into my dirty pocket with shaking hands and pulled out my keys. I fumbled with the lock for a few seconds before the door finally clicked open. I threw my heavy pack into the passenger seat. I threw my rifle right next to it. I climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the heavy metal door shut. I locked it immediately. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life on the first try. I blasted the heater to warm up my freezing, shaking body. I put the truck in drive and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The tires spun in the loose dirt before catching grip. I sped down that long, rough dirt road faster than I ever had before. I watched the deep, dark Pennsylvania woods shrink in my rearview mirror. I was finally leaving his territory. I was finally safe. I had survived the impossible. I drove for 4 straight hours without stopping once. I just wanted to get back to the loud, noisy, concrete city. I wanted to be far away from anything green or quiet. When I finally pulled into the driveway of my own house, I broke down. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and cried like a baby. The adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving nothing but pure exhaustion. I was safe. It was completely over. Or so I thought. I drove for what felt like an absolute eternity. My foot was pressed so hard against the gas pedal that my right ankle actually started to cramp. I didn't care. I just wanted to put as much distance between me and those dark trees as physically possible. I watched the rough, bumpy dirt road finally turn into smooth, black asphalt. It was the greatest sight I had ever seen in my entire life. I rolled up my truck windows tight and locked the doors. I turned the heater up as high as it would go. My whole body was still shivering violently, and I couldn't tell if it was from the freezing cold or the pure shock. Probably a mix of both. I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. Every single time a pair of headlights appeared behind me on the road, my heart would completely stop. I kept expecting to see a rusty old pickup truck tailgating me. I expected to see him ramming into my back bumper. But every time it was just a normal car passing by. A minivan with a family inside. A guy driving a delivery truck. Normal people living their normal, safe lives. They had absolutely no idea what I had just crawled out of. They didn't know that monsters were actually real, and that one of them was living right out there in the deep Pennsylvania woods. After about 2 hours of driving, I finally hit the main highway. The bright orange streetlights illuminated the lanes. I saw massive green highway signs pointing toward the city. I turned the radio on and cranked the volume up. I needed to hear human voices. I needed the loud, obnoxious sound of a morning talk show to drown out the ringing in my ears. I needed it to block out the memory of that terrifying shotgun blast. I drove past a brightly lit gas station. I saw a guy standing by his car, pumping gas and looking at his phone. I wanted so badly to pull over and run inside. I wanted to tell the cashier to lock the doors and call the police. But my paranoid brain wouldn't let me stop. I felt like if I stopped moving, even for a single second, he would catch up to me. I just wanted the ultimate safety of my own home, my fortress. I finally reached my neighborhood right as the sun was fully rising in the sky. It was a beautiful, crisp Saturday morning in the suburbs. Everything looked exactly the way I left it. People were out walking their golden retrievers on the pristine sidewalks. Sprinkler systems were ticking back and forth, watering perfectly green lawns. A kid was riding his bicycle down the street. It felt like I was looking at an entirely different planet. The contrast between this safe, manicured world and the brutal, muddy forest was completely insane. I pulled into my concrete driveway and slammed the truck into park. I cut the engine and just sat there for a long minute. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were pure white. I took a deep, shaky breath. I did it. I actually survived. I'd beat the game. I grabbed my car keys with shaking hands and stumbled out of the truck. My legs felt like they were made of wet sand. My knees almost buckled as soon as my heavy boots hit the concrete. Every single muscle in my body was screaming in pure agony. I dragged my feet up the front steps to my small porch. I fumbled with my keys for a solid 30 seconds. I dropped them once, the metal clattering loudly against the wood. I panicked, looking over my shoulder at the quiet street. Nobody was there. I picked the keys up, shoved the brass key into the lock, and twisted. The front door clicked open. I stepped inside and practically fell against the heavy wooden door to shut it. I turned the deadbolt until it clicked loudly into place. I reached up and slid the heavy metal chain lock across the frame door. I didn't stop there. I walked through the entire house like a crazy person. I checked the back door in the kitchen and made sure the deadbolt was thrown. I checked the sliding glass door in the living room and put a wooden dowel in the track. I went to every single window on the first floor and locked them tight. I pulled all the heavy curtains shut, blocking out the morning sunlight. I wanted to seal myself inside a dark, safe little box. Once the house was completely locked down, the adrenaline finally started to drain out of me. It left behind a feeling of exhaustion so deep it hurt my bones. The familiar, comforting smell of my house washed over me. It smelled like stale coffee beans. It smelled like the laundry detergent I used yesterday. It smelled like civilization. For the first time in 48 hours, I felt my chest loosen up. I could finally breathe without feeling like someone was about to choke me. I was completely alone. I was perfectly safe. I walked straight into the downstairs bathroom and flicked on the bright fluorescent light. I looked at myself in the large mirror above the sink. I honestly barely recognized the man staring back at me. I looked absolutely horrible. My hair was matted to my head with sweat and sticky pine sap. My face was completely covered in a thick layer of dried brown mud and dirt. Deep, angry red scratches crossed my cheeks and my forehead from the exploding tree bark. My eyes were completely bloodshot and sunken deep into my skull. I looked exactly like a wild animal that had just escaped a trap. I reached down and slowly peeled off my ruined hunting jacket. It was torn to shreds by the sharp thorn bushes. It was covered in wet mud and smelled faintly of that awful, rotting forest dirt. I dropped it on the bathroom tiles in a messy heap. I unbuttoned my flannel shirt and let it drop to the floor too. My shoulders were deeply bruised in dark shades of purple and black. My collarbone was swollen right where that heavy rock had hit me in the dark. I turned on the hot water tap in the sink. I let it run until steam started fogging up the bottom of the mirror. I cupped my hands, caught the scalding hot water, and splashed it directly onto my face. It burned the open cuts on my cheeks instantly. I hissed in pain, but I didn't stop. I grabbed a bar of white soap and scrubbed my skin raw. I wanted to wash every single trace of that cursed forest off my body. I watched the water in the sink turn dark brown as the mud washed away. It swirled down the drain, taking the nightmare down with it. I grabbed a clean, fluffy white towel from the rack. I pressed it gently against my stinging face to dry off. All I wanted to do right now was take a long, boiling, hot shower. I wanted to order the biggest pizza in the city. And then I wanted to crawl into my incredibly soft bed and sleep for a full week. I would call the police later. I would tell them everything. I would tell them about the hanging deer, the 6 symbols on the trees, and the deadfall trap. I would give them the exact GPS coordinates of where I parked my truck. They could send a whole SWAT team out there to hunt that psycho down. Let him try his heavy boots and his shotgun against trained professionals. But right now, I just needed to lay down before I passed out on the bathroom floor. I kicked off my heavy, muddy boots right there in the hallway. I peeled off my wet, dirty socks. I started walking barefoot down the long hallway toward my master bedroom. The thick carpet felt amazing against the blisters on my bare feet. My house was completely, perfectly silent. But it was a good, safe kind of silence. It was the peaceful quiet of a Saturday morning in a locked house, not the heavy, suffocating, terrifying silence of those dark woods right before an attack. I reached out and grabbed the cool brass handle of my bedroom door. I turned it slowly and pushed the heavy wooden door open. The room was pitch black because my thick blackout curtains were pulled tight. I stepped inside the room. I reached blindly for the light switch on the wall right next to the doorframe. My fingers found the plastic switch. I flicked it up. The bright overhead lights flooded the room instantly, and my heart stopped beating completely. My lungs froze. My stomach dropped so fast and so hard I actually gagged. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move a single muscle. I couldn't even force myself to blink. I just stood there in the doorway, staring in absolute, pure horror. Right there, in the exact center of my bedroom floor, laid out perfectly straight on the soft gray carpet, was my green camping tent. The exact same green tent I had shoved violently into my heavy pack in a panic. The heavy pack that I had abandoned miles back in the deep forest when I ran for my life. It wasn't shoved in a messy ball anymore. It was folded. It was folded neatly with perfect crisp edges, like a display in a sporting goods store. Sitting right on top of the folded green fabric was my heavy tactical flashlight, the exact one I dropped in the dirt when he threw the rock at me in the dark. It wasn't muddy anymore. It was wiped completely clean. The metal casing was polished and shining under my bedroom lights. Lined up right next to the flashlight were my metal tent stakes. They were placed exactly 1 inch apart from each other in a perfect straight row, like a sick, twisted museum display of my own failure. But that wasn't even the worst part. Sitting directly in the center of the perfectly folded tent was a small, rectangular piece of plastic. It was my Pennsylvania driver's license. My mind started spinning totally out of control. It felt like my brain was short-circuiting. How did this gear get inside my house? When I ran out of the woods to my truck, I didn't have my pack. I left it in the mud when the deadfall trap almost crushed me. He must have found it in the brush after I ran away. He must have ripped it open. He must have looked through the front pocket where I always keep my spare wallet. He saw my driver's license. He saw my full name, and he saw my home address. The terrifying logic slammed into me like a freight train. He didn't lose me in the woods last night. He wasn't too slow to catch me. He let me go. He let me run away. He let me think I had won the sick game. He knew exactly where I parked my truck. He knew a faster way out of the woods than I did. He must have driven his own vehicle straight here. He beat me to my own house. He let me drive all the way home, crying and shaking, just so he could beat me here. He wanted me to feel completely, totally safe. He wanted me to lock my doors and sigh with relief. He wanted me to feel the ultimate comfort of my own home, right before he took it all away from me. My entire body went completely cold and numb. The blood drained rapidly from my face. I slowly backed out of the bedroom into the hallway. I didn't turn my back on the room. I just slid my bare feet backward on the carpet. I needed to get back to my truck right now. I needed to run out the front door, break a window if I had to, and call the police. I realized with absolute terror that I hadn't blocked the killer out. I had locked myself inside with him. I had deadbolted the doors and put chains on them. I had trapped myself in a box. But then, the quiet, safe silence of my house changed. The air in the hallway suddenly felt incredibly heavy. It felt exactly like the air in the forest right before the birds stopped singing. And then, my nose picked up a scent. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger by the second. It drifted out from the dark, open doorway of my large walk-in closet down the hall. It was the sickening, sweet smell of rotting meat. It was the smell of rusty metal and old, wet dirt. It was the smell of the hanging deer. I froze completely. I couldn't take another step backward. Snap. A heavy wooden floorboard creaked loudly from deep inside the dark closet. It cracked under the immense weight of a massive, heavy-duty work boot. And then I heard it. The sound that will haunt me for the very short remainder of my life. The low, raspy, wet breathing. It echoed softly in the hallway of my own home. Hunting season is never over, city boy. The deep, gravelly voice whispered from the darkness of the closet. And then he stepped out into the light. Wow, what an absolute nightmare of an ending. I told you guys from the very beginning This one was going to be intensely terrifying. When the hunter truly becomes the hunted, there is nowhere you can hide. If you made it all the way to the end of this crazy story, I need you to do something. Drop a deer emoji down in the comments right now so I know you are a real one. Let me know what you would have done if you walked into that bedroom. Would you have fought back or ran for the window? Thank you so much for listening to the story today. Make sure you hit that subscribe button before you leave the video. Smash the like button if this one gave you the chills. And until next time, stay safe out there in the woods. And always check your closets before you go to sleep. Peace out.